Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for this edition of SmartTalk. My name is Sean McMahon, and I'm Smartbrief's Director of Content for Financial Services, Energy, and Infrastructure. I'm also the editor for While You're Working. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Kanoe Namahoe.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here talking with you, Sean.
Yep. Kanoe is Smartbrief's Director of Editorial Content for our education suite of publications. And so I wanted to talk to you, Kanoe, because right about now, all around the world, there's all kinds of schools that have concluded their school year. And I think that a lot of, educators, students, and parents will all agree that this school year was unlike any other.
Yeah.
And so while everyone has a chance to catch their breath and kind of figure out, what just happened, and parents get to take a break from being what I like to call adjunct educators, I thought I'd reach out to you because you have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the education sector from, the early pre-K learners all the way up through higher ed. Yeah. So I just want to check with you. So what were some of the key takeaways that, the whole education sector learned from the last few months?
It was a bumpy spring for sure. In March, roughly 55.1 million students left their campuses and began learning at home. It was nothing like this had happened in history. So it was completely unprecedented. So right away, certain issues that we've been talking about for a long time rose to the surface. It became, and they were there for everybody to see. And the biggest one, of course, was equity. And what that looks like is equality is when everybody has the same thing. Equity is when everybody has what they need to have the right learning experience. And so right away, we saw issues with students from low-income backgrounds and students who were in rural areas. And the biggest problem was, of course, now that they're learning online, they don't all have access to the internet, or they don't all have devices. And just to kind of put that in some context with some numbers, the latest data, federal data that we have from 2018 says that 14% of students, 14% of children ages 3 through 18 have no access to the internet. They don't have home access to the internet. About 17% don't have a laptop or a desktop at home. So in real numbers, that's about 7 million that don't have the internet and about 9 million that don't have devices. That's a big chunk of students across our country that can't learn. Suddenly everything's gone this way, and they don't have access to the learning materials that they need. So we had to do something, when we had to shut down their schools to keep everybody safe, we had to do something. So we transitioned to online learning. We knew there was going to be issues. They came to the surface right away. So this really was a giant experiment that took place, and some aspects of it were more successful than the others. Some students did fine, but a lot of students struggled. And so as we head into the fall, those are the kinds of things, they were very difficult lessons to endure, but we're going to be taking those lessons into the fall and looking to improve and make some changes to improve the overall experience for those students.
So when you say there were certain segments that kind of, were able to succeed and some that struggled, what were the breakdowns there? Was it age, or what were the kind of the bucket?
Where we saw some, well, for example, let's talk about early learners. There are some things that just don't translate well to an online environment. My granddaughter is 7 years old, and she's very fluid in using devices, her iPad, my Android, but this kid was not having this online learning thing. She missed her teacher. Her routine had been disrupted. So she still met with her teacher once a week on Zoom and so forth, but it's not the same as walking into her classroom every day, hugging her teacher, seeing her friends. And she goes to a STEAM academy. So a lot of her learning is literally hands-on. They're involved in project-based learning. And that was the case for a lot of our early learners. These are preschoolers, kindergarten, first graders, some second graders, kids 8 and under. And so for them, that's not a student that you can just say, log into Moodle and start doing this. It just doesn't work well for them in that respect. Another population that really struggled were our students with special needs. So many of these students have IEPs, individual education plans, and they require certain services and so forth. So some of those services did not necessarily translate well to online, but also some of those services require you to be together in a physical environment somewhere. And for obvious reasons, that was going to be very difficult. So we've got some sorting out to do with that. And then we look at our middle school students, and for them, like young people, like our early learners, Learning is still social for them. They're forming their identities. Heckinger report did a great story on that. They're forming their identities. And a lot of their academic development is tied into those social interactions that they have every day at school with their peers, with teachers, and so forth. So across the spectrum, across the grade levels, issues of equity hit everybody. They hit across those grade levels. But then as you look in the buckets of certain grade levels, there were some differences and some unique challenges for those students.
So what were some of the, a lot of the educators came up with some creative solutions on how to deal with, tackle some of these issues. What were some of those?
Oh, I think if that was anything that kind of added some shine to an otherwise bumpy spring, it was seeing educators across the board become very creative in how they address these issues. You saw superintendents having very difficult conversations with communities. They're the liaison between the district and the community, and they had to provide answers or address issues for which they didn't really have answers. Then you saw principals doing things like read aloud sessions online, and it was their way of connecting with the students in their community. You saw there was a teacher in Dallas-Fort Worth. His name is Mr. B. He's Mr. B, and he teaches math, and one of his students has autism, and that student was really struggling with his math lessons. He just couldn't get it. They were working together quite a bit on Zoom, and so finally Mr. B said, I'm on my way over. And he went and he sat in that student's driveway. They set themselves up about 6 feet apart. Mr. B was on a chair, and he had his dry erase board. And then the young man had a chair, and he had his little TV tray, and they just worked on it. And so you saw teachers rise up, you saw educators rise up, and as much as possible fill in those gaps wherever they had to. If a student didn't have internet access, paraeducators and teachers were driving paper packets home. They were making their way.
Did you call them para-educators?
Yes, they're called para-educators. Yes.
That's a new term. That's a new term for me.
Oh, okay. Para-educators. Those are the people that are in classrooms. Many times you see them in special ed classrooms, and they're the ones helping teachers with any number of things. But you saw para-educators. If a kid didn't have a printer, they're printing out those forms, those worksheets, and they're taking them to students. You saw principals moving mountains, principals and administrators moving mountains to get devices and hotspots for students who didn't have those things, and making sure every single kid had every device and every item that they needed. In some districts, outfitting buses with Wi-Fi is pretty common now, but some districts went further, and they took those Wi-Fi buses and they sent them into neighborhoods where they knew there was very little access, or there was very slow bandwidth there. So as much as they could, schools and districts did whatever they could to fill in those gaps, because the gaps were different from one district to another. Students in more affluent districts were, for the most part, okay.
So you're saying, back to the buses for a second, you're saying they would just park the Wi-Fi enabled buses in the neighborhood and just let all the students know, hey, if you need to, come get internet access, it's right here.
Yeah,
wow.
they've been doing that for a couple of years now. Coachella School District here in California has been doing that for a while. They've got a lot of students that live in mobile home parks near throughout the district. And in a lot of those mobile home parks, either the infrastructure is not great, and they don't, so getting access, it's either very slow or it's non-existent. So they park the buses either in or near those mobile home areas, so all students have the access that they need. And in other places, they're driving them through neighborhoods, parking them so that kids can get online.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So I wanted to pivot a little bit too. I've been hearing a lot about, I have a first grader and a fifth grader, right? And so some of those are fun ages. Definitely the first graders had some challenges kind of staying on task. But what I've heard a lot, or at least kind of murmurs around my district, is that some of these lessons from the hybrid model might be kind of carried over into the future, even when things are quote unquote back to normal. There were some things that people really liked. So when viewers out there hear that term hybrid model, take a second to go walk us through what that is and how that might function.
Sure. A hybrid model is basically a blend of, you've got some learning that will take place on campus and some learning that will take place online or remotely. And that's, school districts are still trying to figure out exactly how they're going to do the fall. So there are some plans that have pieces in place, but they're going to vary from district to district. But by and large, many of them that we're hearing about are going to employ a hybrid model. And that's really for the safety of the staff and the students. So for instance, some of the models that we've heard of have some students coming in 3 days a week, maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And those students will receive, instruction, learning. Students who are from low income or students who have special needs, who need more of an on-campus experience, those kids will probably be there 3 days a week. And then they'll cycle in the other group, the other students, in 2 days a week. And so when students aren't on campus, then they will be doing their instruction or their learning at, online. That's pretty much what that, in a very broad terms, that's what that looks like.
Gotcha. So let's pivot a little bit and talk about higher education. A lot of the colleges and universities are totally been kind of thrown for a shock with all this, and they got to figure their way to get out of this and navigate the future. What are some of the key challenges and solutions that are being bandied around in that
Wow.
sector?
Well, a lot of the challenges that higher ed had were similar to the ones that K-12 had. Again, equity. We shouldn't assume that it's just because a student is in college that student, even if he or she has a phone, that they have internet access at home. So because we know now that many students did not. So when they shut down campuses and sent students home, some students had that challenge. But on the college side, I think one of the biggest trends that we followed that was real tough to watch was the financial devastation that happened. If you've got students on campus and they're paying for room and board, but then you shut down campus and you send those students home, you have to refund that money to those students. So this spring, we just saw a lot of hemorrhaging of money from our colleges and universities, and it was substantial. There's a lot of financial devastation happening. In fact, there are some forecasts that we will see that some campuses won't be able to survive the COVID-19 pandemic, and that they may have to shut down. But as we head into the fall, again, this is another group that they've got a job to do. And so they are doing everything they can to put some plans in place. And the plans are varying from campus to campus. The UCs are out here, University of California is talking about doing mostly remote, although they are going to have some campuses, some classes available on campus, things like engineering, some of those classes where you need to be on campus, for a lab or whatever. Some film production, we're hearing about that. I believe the Cal States are going entirely online. USC has put together a whole project task force around this to figure out, they've got different stakeholders involved in this to try to figure out the best way forward. But we know that many of our student athletes are already back on campuses. They're training, they're getting ready for these fall season. So K-12 and higher ed really have some very big questions that they have to answer, and the clock is ticking. K-12 will start, my granddaughter starts back in school mid to late August. Our students around here will start back at community colleges mid to late August, and then some of the UCs start later in September. So we've got a very short amount of time to answer some very, very big questions. So I suspect as we get into the fall, some things are going to run a bit more smoothly, and then some others are still going to be tricky things that we need to wrestle. So what we all need is to applaud the efforts that are going on, have some patience, and honestly, just keep working towards solutions.
I got you. So just real quick, a lot of the folks viewing this video don't follow the education sector day in and day out like you do. So if I'm a parent, or if I'm someone who's just kind of curious what the fall is going to look like, what are some of the sources out there that you think are solid? I know the mainstream media is doing its best to try and keep people aware of what's going on, but what are some of the trade or industry specific resources and media outlets that you think would be valuable for people to follow?
I think the trades are great. I think the trades are probably the best place to go. And at the top of my list is Education Week. Education Week, I sort of think of them as the Wall Street Journal of education. So they're going to have everything from soup to nuts about what's going on with this. They're the ones that had the map that told you exactly what was going on in every state, how many schools were closed and so forth. So you'll be able to see what's going on with policy, because policy is going to affect what happens at the individual state and district levels. So Education Week is where you definitely want to be looking at that one. Other good ones for just news are EdSource and EdScoop. Another great one that we rely on a lot is our EdSurge and Chalkbeat and The Conversation. And those are really great publications for just seeing what's going on right now in education through the lens of teachers and students, and through the lens of humanity, through the lens of culture. It's a really good way to maybe I think those publications do a good job of putting a face or a human person behind some of the issues that we're seeing. It stops being these big numbers and it starts being an issue that we can understand a lot better.
Okay, great. I appreciate that, Kanoe. Listen, we're about out of time, but I wanted to say thank you to you. I know you're used to being on the other side of these interviews and conducting the interviews, so I appreciate you being a good sport about letting me turn the lens on you. So again, thank you for sharing all your insight, and to everyone else out there, thank you for joining us, and have a great day.
Have a great day, everybody.